Roger Federer's unintentional revelation about Alex Eala has exploded around the tennis community like a surprise no one could have predicted. The best player in history just reacted to something that he was never allowed to speak out. What started out as a routine conversation turned into the season's most shocking revelation. The quiet surrounding a relationship that no journalist was aware of was broken by one careless moment. And now everyone in the sport is asking for answers. What information has Federer been keeping about this up-and-coming Filipino star? It was an unplanned confession. The consequences were disastrous. The scene appeared quite innocent. In what seemed to be just another typical retrospective, Roger Federer was invited by a prominent Swiss sports network to examine his illustrious career, analyze contemporary tennis, and celebrate his retirement legacy. There was no indication that the discussion would go too far. Federer showed up with a laid-back, even careless appearance. Predictably, the interviewer began with nostalgia. Wimbledon triumphs, thrilling Nadal matches, and the heartfelt LVER Cup goodbye. For a champion who had already bid farewell to professional competition, it was standard procedure. The air exuded coziness, comfort, and security. The pivot then came. The interviewer remarked casually, "You've always had an eye for emerging talent, Roger. Who in women's tennis is exciting to you at the moment?" Federer had responded to the seemingly innocuous query innumerable times before with tactful kudos for names that were clear. Sabalenka, Gal, and Fiat. Vague enough to pique her interest without making headlines, but generic enough to steer clear of controversy. However, his expression changed this time. Federer paused, but not in the tactful way that a cautious diplomat might. This was unique, sincere, and conflicted, as though he was considering opening a door that he purposefully kept locked. His jaw stiffened and his eyes narrowed a little. The internal conflict taking place in real time would have been obvious to anyone paying careful attention. He began, "There's someone," but then stopped. The interviewer felt blood in the water and leaned forward. Professional instinct took over. This was no longer scripted territory. "I've been watching a certain player for over 3 years. Someone that most people haven't discussed yet. Someone with whom I have had a behind-the-scenes relationship." The temperature of the room abruptly altered. With a name that hung in the air like a confession at trial, he said, "Alex Eala. I haven't done anything for anyone outside of my own academy except to watch her games, give her technical advice, mentor her privately, and put her in touch with my old coaches." The interviewer looked completely shocked. The general population was unaware of this. The relationship between the emerging Filipino star and the Swiss maestro had not been publicized by any tennis media outlet. No social media clues, no training sessions exposed. Federer knew at a way what he had done. Something like remorse, or maybe freedom, flickered across his face. The secret had been revealed. Walking it back was not an option. With a shaky giggle that did nothing to lessen the gravity of what had just come out of his mouth, "I probably shouldn't have said that. It's too late." The video quickly went viral on all tennis platforms within 17 minutes. Twitter went wild. Instagram took off. Threads on Reddit spread like wildfire. Explanations were requested by the tennis community. Reporters rushed to confirm information. Previously only known to die-hard fans of lower-tier competitions, Eala's name abruptly took center stage in international sports headlines. Why would the most admired player in the sport, Roger Federer, covertly invest in a Filipino unranked player? What did he notice that the others didn't? Why the secrecy, too? The tennis world's preconceived notions about Federer's retirement activities and Eala's unlikely path to importance were in danger of changing as a result of the unintentional admission. However, this is what no one was aware of yet. Federer's relationship with Eala wasn't coincidental. The true cause is more complex than skill. And when the whole truth came to light, it would contradict all of the fans' preconceived notions about the largest figure in sports. That shocking statement was not the end of the interview. If anything, Federer chose to go into deeper detail, revealing a mentoring that no one was aware of, possibly because he felt he had already reached the point of no return. Federer disclosed that Alex's tone changed from one of sorrow to one of nearly protection during the 2022 US Open Juniors, which is when I first noticed him. She possessed this trait, not just talent, but cerebral structure. I was reminded of players from a different age by the manner she created points. Patient, cunning, and deadly when the chance arose. After watching the match footage, he explained contacting her through mutual connections and providing technical feedback. Regular video analysis sessions developed from what began as sporadic observations. Federer would analyze her serve mechanics, footwork, and tactical judgment under duress. The same forensic methodology he had used throughout his career on his own game. "I put her in touch with my fitness coach, Pierre Paganini." Federer was alluding to the man who had sustained his competitiveness into his 40s. I presented her to my 20-year coach, Severin Luthi. Last summer, I even made arrangements for her to train for 2 weeks at my academy in Switzerland, completely off the record. No announcements, no media. The disclosures continued to pour in. Private court sessions, dietary advice, coaching for mental performance, and help with equipment sponsorship. All the while remaining completely silent about the arrangement, Federer had effectively built a shadow development program around Eala, using his whole professional network to speed up her development. Why her? The interviewer asked, a query that echoed in the minds of millions of spectators. Federer's response got right to the point. Because she is ignored by everyone. She hails from a nation that lacks facilities for tennis. She lacks the funding that other hopefuls have. She is opposing a system that favors tennis players from developed countries. In that fight, I recognized myself. People remember the young player who needed someone to believe in him before the rest of the world did, not the affluent champion. Those who witnessed the comparison were taken aback. Federer, who was born and reared in Switzerland with access to top-notch training and financial support from a federation, compares himself to a Filipino athlete fighting for recognition from an archipelago nation with little tennis history. The analogy was instantly criticized for being tone-deaf and unrealistic. Federer, however, doubled down. In my career, talent was never a certainty. I was successful because people put money into me before the returns were worth it. When I was emotional and unruly, Tony Rowe saw potential. When I was losing junior matches, Peter Carter thought I was wrong. Alex is deserving of the same trust. Then he predicted something that rocked the world of professional tennis. She will make it into the top 30 in 3 years. She will advance to a Grand Slam quarterfinal in 5. That's the judgment I'm risking my reputation on. Those were words of doom, coming from perhaps the greatest player in history. Although he rarely made public forecasts about particular players, Federer support may create chances. Media coverage, sponsorship attention, and wildcard entries, all of which may take years to obtain naturally. Nevertheless, it also made Alex Eala a huge target. Once non-existent expectations suddenly loomed like storm clouds. Every competition would be evaluated in light of Federer's prediction. With each defeat, doubts would grow about whether his judgment had finally failed him. Social media immediately split into factions. Federer's generosity was praised by supporters, who also praised his readiness to utilize his fame to further an underdog cause. He was criticized for putting Alice under unwarranted pressure and maybe undermining her growth by putting her in situations for which she wasn't ready. Insiders in tennis voiced confusion. Agents rushed to figure out how this relationship had been kept a secret for so long. Rivals questioned whether Federer had provided others with comparable covert assistance or whether Eala offered something special and alluring. Alex Eala herself sat in the middle of this hurricane, ready to learn that her personal path had just become horribly, irrevocably public. One pressing question that no one could address was brought up by Federer's confession. Alex Eala is exactly who? And what was it about this Manila adolescent that persuaded tennis royalty to jeopardize his well-preserved legacy? Tennis privilege was not something Alexandra Montgo Aya was born with. No federation infrastructure ensuring access to international competition, no family dynasty, and no hereditary money financing private mies. She came out of situations that, according to statistics, should have kept her from ever posing a threat to the importance of professional tennis. Aya was born in Quezon City, Philippines, in May 2005, and she represented a country where basketball is the most popular sport and a major source of funding. As a sport for wealthy families with country club memberships, tennis was an afterthought and not a realistic route to physical success. In the modern era, the Philippines has never produced a Grand Slam singles champion or a player ranked in the top 50. There was just no infrastructure. Nevertheless, this Manila girl started crushing junior competition with scary effectiveness. She moved to Spain when she was 14 years old and enrolled in the Rafa Nadal Academy, a move that required financial sacrifices that most families couldn't understand. Being athletes themselves, her parents saw untapped talent that needed to be developed beyond what their nation could offer. The amount of money spent was enormous. Success in the workplace was still quite unlikely. Aya quickly defended their faith. She won the Australian Open Girls Doubles Championship in 2020. Then the French Open Women's Doubles title in 2021. Then, in 2022, she became the first Filipino to win the US Open Girls Singles title. These were no coincidences. These were methodical attacks on ostensibly better competition. However, professional domination is rarely the result of junior success. There are countless junior winners in tennis history who faded into oblivion after facing the harsh reality of the major tour. Different levels of physicality, mental strain, and tactical intelligence are needed. Eala was more aware of this than most. She had witnessed bright prospects go up in flames, either crushed under pressure or revealing technical flaws when they faced more experienced opponents. She was aware that without a smooth transfer, her junior achievements were meaningless. Federer's participation became pivotal at that point. Federer didn't merely provide general encouragement, according to people who spoke on condition of anonymity following his confession. He offered forensic analysis of the weaknesses in her game, the precise flaws that would keep her from making it through professional competition. Although her serve worked well against juniors, it lacked the placement and speed needed to overwhelm WTA opponents. Although she had good movement, she needed to work on handling the angles that top players would create. Although competitive, her mental strategy needed to be strengthened to face the psychological battle that lay ahead. Federer's network methodically corrected every flaw. Paganini changed her training regimen to include more explosive power without compromising the flexibility that was essential to her defensive prowess. Luthi changed the way she practiced, focusing on situational pattern identification instead of monotonous repetition. Her recuperation procedures were adjusted by nutritionists. She learned visualization techniques from sports psychologists that Federer himself had used in pivotal games. Above all, Federer provided her with something that coaching alone could not create: conviction that her ceiling was not determined by her origins. The best players aren't born. They're constructed through relentless attention to detail, Eala told me in a rare interview conducted months prior to Federer. However, there were still unanswered issues regarding Federer's intentions. She didn't name him then, respecting the privacy he'd requested. But the philosophy clearly originated from their conversations. Talent opens doors. Discipline keeps them open. Why put so much effort into someone who doesn't produce anything in the workplace? Why not make his charitable participation public rather than keeping it under wraps? Why stake his well-nurtured legacy on an unknown product? Some cynics proposed a planned image restoration, portraying him as a generous senior statesman instead of a retiring champion who was losing his significance. Others hypothesized that he replaced the competitive void retirement produced by seeking vicarious gratification through Eala's profession. Federer's close associates, however, provided a more straightforward answer. He really thought she had something special, something that should be shielded from the poisonous environment that snuffs out young genius before it can develop. According to a former Federer instructor who asked to remain anonymous, Roger believes that tennis is becoming more and more uniform. Everybody used the same training methods in the same years, which resulted in interchangeable playing styles. Alex is a different kind of person. A distinct method of problem-solving influenced by her unorthodox journey. He hopes that diversity will endure. Federer's confession ensured one thing, but it's unclear if his support turns out to be prescient or delusional. Eala's path would be scrutinized like never before, with each setback examined to see if the greatest tennis player had finally made a mistake. Federer's support ought to have been a joyous occasion. Rather, it sent up a torrent of criticism that threatened to topple everything he had worked so hard to create. It was a quick, vicious, and intensely personal retaliation. The response from the tennis community was sharply divided along unanticipated fault lines. What ought to have been a touching tale of opportunity and mentoring instead sparked charges of privilege, favoritism, and structural injustice. Critics immediately attacked Federer, casting doubt on his morality and judgment. Why Eala in particular? Without assistance, hundreds of gifted athletes suffered. Why should she have access to resources that others might only imagine? There were hints of skepticism in the questions, that his choice was influenced by things other than merit. Social media turned into a battlefield. Trending hashtags called for openness on the relationship's beginnings. There were many conspiracy theories that suggested Federer's involvement was driven by financial deals or family ties. Financial incentives that Federer had concealed investing holdings in Eala's future profits were conjectured by some. Representatives of other players used well-crafted statements to vent their dissatisfaction. It was obvious what was implied when an Eastern European coach whose athlete faced Eala and juniors wrote, "Interesting how some receive royal treatment while others grind alone. Makes you wonder what truly determines who gets opportunities." The gains of Eala were not merited. They received their prize through celebrity intervention, which warped the fairness of competition. Reactions from women's tennis figures were not entirely consistent. Federer's readiness to help up-and-coming players, especially those from underrepresented areas, was commended by some. Others questioned why, instead of systemic systems that benefited several athletes, his mentorship concentrated on one individual. A well-known sports journalist questioned Roger's decision to personally coach one player rather than provide scholarships for 50 if he truly cared about democratizing tennis access. This seems more like a personal effort than charity. When financial information surfaced, the criticism grew more intense. Federer reportedly paid for more than $200,000 in expenditures. Expenses for equipment, travel, lodging, and training, establishing a resource imbalance that rivals cannot close. Given that Eala essentially had an 8-time Wimbledon winner as her personal consultant, how could any competitor claim fair competition? Directors of tournaments were under pressure to resolve possible conflicts of interest. Should Federer's support for Eala be used as part of the criteria for wildcard admission rather than just ranking merit? Did his participation amount to an unfair benefit that needed to be disclosed or subject to restrictions? Some claimed Federer had transgressed unwritten moral rules. They maintained that champions should either mentor widely or not at all, never tipping the scales of competition by giving one selected athlete exceptional benefits. In the blaze, Eala herself ended up as collateral damage. Messages accusing her of being Federer's pet project instead of a serious candidate inundated her social media sites. Her younger accomplishments were written off as unimportant by critics, who said she only achieved because she had access to resources that her rivals did not. One viral comment mockingly said, "Congrats on having a famous friend." The psychological damage was severe and instantaneous. Let's see how you do without Daddy Federer holding your hand. Despite her junior success, Eala had kept a quiet profile. Suddenly, she was under scrutiny usually reserved for well-known celebrities. Every practice is captured on camera, every competition entry is examined, and every outcome is evaluated not by realistic developmental expectations but by veterinarian prediction. The first thing she said was a well-written sentence. "I am appreciative of the numerous mentors who have helped me along the way. My findings will be more persuasive than any discussion of support networks. I'm here to compete and demonstrate my abilities." Critics who demanded a more clear acknowledgement of her advantages were not satisfied by the measured tone. Her shortness was seen by others as a sign of her conceit and her ignorance of the privilege she had been granted. Federer, however, had to face his own consequences. Sponsors questioned whether his brand value was harmed by the scandal. Concerns over possible incompatibilities with their own player development programs were discreetly voiced by the Swiss Federation. His judgment was suddenly called into doubt by critical evaluations published by media outlets that had praised him for decades. His revelation was characterized in one particularly critical post as a wealthy retiree's vanity project disguised as philanthropy, applauding himself for giving while placing unrealistic expectations on a youngster. But the most severe criticism came from unexpected quarters. Those who had supported Federer feel deceived by his seeming hypocrisy. He promoted meritocracy, the notion that accomplishments were more important than relationships, during his career. Critics now said that by using his power to create opportunities for a selected favorite, he had violated that ideal. However, underneath the charges and fury was a deeper subject that no one wanted to face head-on. Did Federer's involvement simply level the playing field because tennis's current structure already favors some athletes so much? Or did his actions add another layer of arbitrary advantage, exacerbating already existing inequities? The argument continued without a conclusion. And trapped at its center, a 19-year-old Manila girl stated, questioning whether the greatest tennis champion had just unintentionally ruined the career he had attempted to salvage. However, the critics were overlooking an important detail that would only be revealed when the whole narrative was revealed. Federer's investment in Eala was not an act of benevolence. It was painfully, intensely personal. Everything was altered by Roger Federer's verbal blunder. What initially appeared to be a casual comment turned into a turning point for discussions around privilege, opportunity, and equity in professional tennis as well as for Alex Eala. The revelation of his confession is more important than whether or not his prophecy comes to pass. Talent has never been sufficient on its own. The first step is for someone to believe. Before the results validate that belief, someone must make an investment. That gift was given to Federer decades ago. He's attempting to forward it now. Whether he made the right decision will be determined by history, but one thing is certain. The world is watching every single shot of Alex Eala's story, which has only just begun. Was Eala's ascent accelerated by Federer's confession, or was it an error that imposed intolerable pressure? Leave your comments below. Please hit the notification bell and subscribe if you would want to receive more untold stories about the most significant disputes in tennis and the events that permanently altered careers. We have only just begun.